We are more than halfway through August, and I'm finally going to be done talking about the books I read in August and September. Exciting times. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Recmebook&stuff, and today I bring you the August-September books that were actually on my TBR, or really on a TBR, because there are two that weren't on these month's TBR, but they've been in past TBRs. It's also complicated, who can keep count? Basically, I'm going to review books. Let's begin with the only ebook on this list, and that is Who Knew by Robert Cutietta. This is questions you had about classical music and you never thought to ask. Basically, the author was the host of a radio program, and he's also, I want to say the director, but that may not be accurate. Like, he's a very important part of the USC Thornton Music School. This was so fun to read. It's very straightforward. It's a curated list of the questions that people submitted to the radio show, explained in a very straightforward way. What is most important about this book, I think, apart from how readable it is the demographic, because it has a very specific demographic in mind, which is people who attend either casually or regularly but have some degree of familiarity with classical music performances, but they don't have any formal training and they don't know that much about it. So they might have questions they are embarrassed to ask, or they might not even have anyone to ask them to. I think I read this at the perfect point. There were some things that I've learned this year that if I had read this a year ago, I wouldn't have known, and that makes me happy because it means I'm learning. In any case, I think I am the perfect demographic for this because I've been attending classical music performances since I was like 15 on my own. We get really good discounts being under 30. It's true that you go and you enjoy these, but you don't know a lot of the things. Some of the questions are very pragmatic, having to do with seating arrangement, or why people don't clap between movements usually, or what does the conductor do, or how a program is decided, that sort of thing, like how the classical music business enterprise works, how an orchestra works, and some other have to do with interpretation and the classical music itself. But overall, there are questions that if you are someone who very casually enjoys classical music, you might wonder. So if that is you and you want to know these little fun trivia tidbits, I really recommend this book to you. What I think is a strength in terms of writing is that it's just very straightforward and the author is very, very funny. So I really enjoyed this. I really recommend this. Then something very related. I finally finished What to Listen For in Music by Aaron Copland, and I adore this. You can see that I marked it quite a bit. However, I don't think necessarily that this holds up today as to what the author, who is also of course a very famous American composer, intended to do with it. It was supposed to bring the lay person closer to classical music and classical music appreciation, and I don't think that's going to happen, especially nowadays. This was written for a whole other audience. This was originally published in 1939. So you see completely different context, but Copland also mentions that this would also work really well for students who are aspiring professional musicians that are so focused on their own instrument that might lose sight of, the entirety of music. And I also think it works very well for someone like me who's only starting to learn an instrument and learn classical music from a structural perspective. This is very helpful because it talks about different elements of music, so like melody and harmony. It also talks about different forms and provides examples where you might listen to a particularly interesting use of that form. So I really enjoyed it. I think it can get a bit dry. It's not super dense. If you've seen any other music theory book. They are so dense and so impenetrable, and if you have like a similar book that is not that way, please do let me know. But yeah, this one is very accessible, and I think it will help a lot of people still. I think what is most valuable is that it is easy to read overall for what it is. If you're looking for a starter music theory book, this is the way to go. Like, you cannot find a better one from what I've seen or from what I've encountered in my limited research. Imagine this is such a classic that it's a senior classic, and I found it at my local bookstore that sells really a limited range of books. I was really shocked to find this there, but after reading it, I can totally see why. Completely recommend if that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for something more of, I want to start getting into classical music and actually appreciating it, there's a book that I haven't read, but from what I've skimmed at a bookstore, actually, it's called A Year of Wonder. I'll put the cover here because I don't remember the author, and it's basically just a piece a day, but it kind of explains the context in a very basic form. You want to find a guide that is very, very easily digestible and requires no theory whatsoever. I think this is actually the way to go. Then I read Dracula by Bram Stoker. Yes, I finally got to Dracula. In case you don't know what this is about, this is not actually about Dracula, which, you know, I feel like now in the bookish world, we all know that Dracula is not what we think it is, even before we know what it actually is. It's because Dracula was very popular when it was published, but actually had its biggest revival when Hollywood started making monster adaptations, which is kind of what happened with Frankenstein as well. In any case, this is a document style novel, mostly journal entries, but there are also telegrams and some reports, and it's about Jonathan Harker, who goes to work as a solicitor, I think, for this Count Dracula, and he realizes weird things start happening. That's only the first part, which is actually my favorite part, but then as he disappears, his fiancée, Mina, begins to get suspicious and decides she needs to rescue him. I really, really enjoy this. I think this is a really fun book. However, I do not think it's an astonishingly well-written book, and it was tedious at times. It's very long, it's 500 pages long. Could have been shorter, but because I do like the document format of the book, I think it was much more digestible. Oh my god, the car alarm. You know, I really like fiction that passes as nonfiction, right? And this, I think, is kind of a precursor to that. That whole found document genre is a precursor to that idea. So I really enjoyed that aspect. You can write whole essays, and people have, of course, on Dracula's worldview, and one of the very discussed topics is depictions of femininity, because there is this flirty woman who basically gets what she deserves, even though she's a good person. It's just that because she kind of represents this Victorian temptress, she deserves what happens to her. As a contrast to that, there's Mina, who's virginal and good, but also really respectable and strong-willed. And I think in that way, this is a bit progressive, because Mina is an important part of the plot, and the fact that she is the savior is really, really cool. So although I do, of course, take issue with the fact that in order to be admirable, a woman needs to be respectable as well, and she needs to embody all these ideas of purity, I do still think it's really, really amazing how active she is and how much of a subject she is, which is really tragic if you think about it, that the bar is so low that like a woman at this time doing cool things is noteworthy, but it is, so I'm very happy about that. There are other characters in here, the professor and, you know, Val Helsing. It's really cool. It's just like a campy book. And again, there is a lot to analyze in the same way that there's a lot to analyze in any historical document, but I don't think it's as extraordinary as some people make it out to be. Still a really fun time, really good. I really enjoyed it, and I'll probably reread it eventually, but I'm not racing to do so. I have 3 plays by Edward Albee. This includes The Death of Bessie Smith, The Sandbox, and The American Dream. I read all 3 because they were so good. It's just, I forgot how much I love Edward Albee. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is definitely one of the plays that I've seen live the most, and I also really, really love At the Zoo. These were like my least favorites in terms of that ranking, and of course I need to read much more by him, but I still like them. My favorite one was The American Dream, which is set in a house, and it's about this couple, this marriage actually, and one of those very static Albee situations that gets out of control really quickly. A visitor comes and wreaks havoc, and of course you don't really know what's happening. It's really, really good. My least favorite was The Sandbox, that features the same couple, or like you can read it as the same couple. I think I did. So the same couple with the man's mother are on this playground, and the angel of death comes to see the grandma. And then The Death of Bessie Smith takes place largely in a hospital. It is a lot about race. It has a very interesting look at race, so I like that one, but I still think the strongest one is The American Dream. I think the way you're not really sure who these people are and what their relationship to each other is keeps your attention, and the dialogue, of course, is so clever, it's so magnificent. I loved it. Then I want to talk to you about Sherlock Holmes, our Lord and Savior. I read The Sign of Four by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle because we've been buddy reading this with Amelia Reeds and Natalie from A Curious Reader. It's been fabulous. Their insights are so cool. I'm very happy to be doing this project with them. And The Sign of Four was one that I usually enjoy as an adaptation. I think out of the 3 that we've read, this is my least favorite so far. This has one of the more convoluted plots. It's about this pact between corrupt guards and 4 criminals, and it's set in India, and it features a lot of racism, basically. It also features Mary. It's, I think, her first appearance. She is presented as this very respectable Victorian lady. You can see a theme there, right? Watson immediately takes a liking to her. I don't remember much of it now that it's been a while. It's just, I thought it really dragged. I think it's, again, one that I've seen adapted a lot, and I think it's really fun because they can take one of the members of the pack appearing dead in a much cooler way than it's done here, which is, again, deeply, deeply racist. But it does open with Sherlock Holmes' drug habit, and it sort of goes into Holmes' psyche. Watson tries to understand why such a brilliant man would do that. I don't remember, but I think this explicitly mentions cocaine, which is very interesting that he takes cocaine to calm down. Maybe it's opium, I'm not sure. In any case, what is so cool is that it's a very modern look at nihilism and boredom and like existential dread, and like, oh, there's nothing to stimulate me. And Watson, although concerned, he's not judgy. He doesn't consider it a weakness of character or a corruption of the soul. He finds a very psychological explanation for it. So I liked it for that aspect, but I didn't love it as much as I really, really enjoyed The Hound of the Baskervilles. This is about supposedly a murderous dog that could be a hellhound, but could also not. Who knows? Holmes sends Watson to investigate, and a lot of the story is told in Watson's letters to Holmes. I think it was so much fun. I think because it's less tainted by other genres and it's just a fun story. There was less to critique, which is a weird way of looking at it. But I just really enjoyed Watson being center stage. I really enjoyed Watson just being at the forefront and talking to Holmes, because since he's the narrator, it's kind of different what he tells us as readers, right? Versus what he tells Sherlock, because he wants to be of assistance to the investigation. We also see Sherlock goading Watson on, like stimulating his mind so he can also polish his deduction powers, and I thought that was so cute. I just really appreciate their relationship. I think it's such a cool friendship because it's like, I accept you just as you are, and in a way they fit so well, and they do have genuine admiration for each other, which I really appreciate. Then in terms of the mystery, I think it's one of the best ones just because it's so simple, it's so fun to read. It's very gothic, and I think that suits it very well. It doesn't have as much racism, and it doesn't have as much women being idiots. Again, bar extremely low, but that's the case. So I was the least bothered by this one. I just really enjoyed it through and through. And adventure story wise, this was my favorite. And then finally, I have a Spanish edition beautifully illustrated by Luisa Rivera. Okay, you can see none of the illustrations, I'm sorry. There you go. Of Love in Times of Cholera by Gabriel García Márquez. And you know Gabriel García Márquez is one of my favorite authors of all time. It's one of those authors that arrived early on in my reading life and never really left. However, this is my least favorite thing I have ever read from Gabriel García Márquez. Ever. It's still very well written. I enjoyed it for that. His meditations on time passing and youth versus old age and dying, and the paragraphs where he talks about different types of love and what love is are still fabulous. Even a bad or a medium Gabriel García Márquez novel or text is still like such a superior novel. However, I hate what it says about love and its depiction of women. So basically this is about Fermina and Florentino, and they met when they are both very young and they sort of fall in love. Florentino falls in love with Fermina right away and starts writing letters to her, and she falls in love with his letter writing. However, when they meet in person, she realizes she might be making a mistake by overcommitting to this man, and so she cuts it off. She goes on to marry a guy called Juvenal, and they have a whole life together, and he is a far superior and more interesting character than Florentino, by the way. But the book starts with Juvenal's last days and subsequent death. So it's really told in a very non-chronological manner that flows like a river. I mean, you know how modernism is so much stream of consciousness? This is sort of stream of happening and emotion, stream of life, really. It's not about consciousness per se, but it's just how memory, right, flows, and it's so well done in that way. He's such an amazing author, and that's my conflict, really. And I think this is a really good question. If the writing is good enough, can you stand a plot that you really don't like? And I especially hated how Fermina is not a real character. She's really flat compared to Florentino and Juvenal, who are just so fascinating men and meet so many fascinating people. So it's kind of hard for me to review this. Have you seen How I Met Your Mother? Well, How I Met Your Mother, the controversial ending included, is a retelling of this book. You can understand where I'm going with this. It's hard to discuss it without spoilers, but other things I do appreciate is the historical context. This is set in a very small town, and Juvenal and Fermina travel a lot, and also Juvenal is like the most important person in the little town. So it kind of shows this difference between Paris, which is a city that's so developed and with so much art and music and society, and then coming back to this little town, a very huge contrast. And Juvenal kind of wants the little town to emulate Paris, and that is very interesting. And I also love the role of objects as movers of plot, as expressions of emotion and personality. I think the characterization through objects here is really, really strong. But yeah, the women representation sucks. And I know this is an older book, but compared to, for example, 100 Years of Solitude, which is an absolute masterpiece, because there it's so much more of an epic tale and the characters are much more just archetypes, it's so much easier to look past anything. I also read it when I was younger, granted, so I need to reread it. But here, because there are two very strong characters that also act sort of as introducers of culture and thought into women characters, and they both do that, is so much more apparent that the main female character is such a flat one. And the two men mirror each other. They are both great men in their own ways, but the women they meet aren't, and so that really pains me. And also, there is a very, very creepy, still kind of romanticized relationship between like I don't remember how old he was, but like 70-year-old man and a schoolgirl. Gross. I mean, he admits that she might perceive him as gross. He thinks about that, but he still goes ahead and okay. Another good thing to end this on a positive note is, again, the contrast on different types of love and what a soulmate really is and like what love really is, I think is a great meditation. I just don't really like the conclusion. And that is it. Not that many books to tell you about, I think, because I tried to even them out. Still talked a lot though. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe and comment. Have you read any of these books, and or are you planning to after hearing me talk about them? And also, I'm so excited because next week I will bring you my non-fiction November TBR and MBR. Non-fiction November is coming. I've been watching lots of TBRs. I'm very excited. So if you have a TBR and I haven't checked it out yet because, you know, life, please do link it down below. Exciting times. That's it. See you next time.